I'm Ava, and I'm 25 now. I work as a software engineer in Denver, and let me tell you, it's a far cry from the small town where I grew up. My journey to independence wasn't easy, but it all started when I broke free from the grip of my mother's control. To understand how I got here, you need to know where I came from. I grew up in a tiny town near Sacramento, under the oppressive rule of my mother, Margaret. My childhood was anything but normal. From as far back as I can remember, Margaret dictated every aspect of my life. There were no allowances, no sleepovers, and no space for rebellion. If I ever stepped out of line, the punishment was swift and harsh. Some days, it meant no dinner. On others, I'd lose privileges to things I loved. Freedom was a concept I only read about in books. Even though I excelled in school, Margaret was always steering me in the direction she thought was best. She chose my college, ignoring my dreams of attending a university in a bustling city. Instead, she insisted on a smaller school closer to home, determined to keep me tethered to her world. But college was where I first glimpsed independence. I began making choices for myself, and after graduation, I jumped at the chance to move to Denver. I landed a job at a leading tech company, and for the first time, I felt like I was finally living for me. I found a small but charming apartment near the city center. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it became my sanctuary of independence. Life in Denver was refreshing and full of possibilities. I savored the little things, walking to work, picking out my own groceries, and planning my own days. 4 months, life felt beautifully ordinary, but then, strange things started happening. Anonymous calls, peculiar messages. It was all subtle, but unsettling. I brushed it off, assuming it was just echoes of my overly controlled past. One evening, my neighbor, Mr. Lawson, knocked on my door. He's a graphic designer, older than me, with a kind smile and a quiet demeanor. "Ava, can I have a word?" he asked, his tone laced with concern. "Of course, Mr. Lawson. Is something wrong?" I replied, masking the unease creeping in. "I saw someone acting suspiciously near your apartment earlier," he said. "I thought you should know, they seemed to be trying to get inside." My heart sank. I hadn't noticed anything unusual, but his words sent a wave of anxiety crashing over me. "Are you sure? Maybe it was nothing." He shook his head. "I'm sure. You should check it out, just to be safe." When I stepped inside my apartment, everything seemed normal. Just as I began to relax, something caught my eye, a handbag I didn't recognize. It was a sleek designer piece, unmistakably out of place. I froze, then cautiously opened it. Inside was a note. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "I'm sorry, Ava, I had to come. I've been watching you. I needed to know you were okay." My breath hitched. It was from Margaret. Fury and disbelief surged through me. How had she found me? Then I remembered, the handbag. It was one of her gifts, a thoughtful gesture at the time, but now I realized it had been rigged with a tracking device. She had been monitoring me. Turning to Mr. Lawson, who had lingered at my door, I said, "It's my mother. She's been tracking me, using this bag. I can't believe she'd do this." His face softened with sympathy. "That's a serious invasion of your privacy, Ava. I'm sorry." "I need to confront her," I said firmly, though my voice wavered. "She can't keep doing this." The next day, I drove to the address where Margaret was staying, a modest apartment not far from where I'd grown up. My heart pounded as I knocked on her door. When she opened it, her face betrayed a mix of surprise and guilt. "Ava," she said, her voice trembling, "I wasn't expecting you." "Really?" I snapped. "You've been tracking me with a hidden device, and you're surprised?" She flushed. I needed to know you were safe." "Safe? By violating my privacy? By suffocating me even when I've moved halfway across the country?" My voice shook with anger. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she defended herself. "I was only trying to protect you. I've always done what's best for you." "Best for me?" I nearly shouted. "You've made my choices for me my entire life. I'm 25, Mom. I need to live on my own terms." She broke down, her tears falling freely. I didn't know how to let go. "Ava, I've made mistakes, but I don't know how to fix them." I took a deep breath, knowing this confrontation was just the beginning of finally reclaiming my life. I stared at her, caught between pity and frustration. "You're not just apologizing for tracking me, Margaret. You need to understand how deeply your control has shaped my entire life." She hesitated before revealing something I hadn't expected. "I've been struggling financially," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I wanted to ask you for help, but I didn't know how." The confession hit me like a punch to the gut. You spied on me to figure out how to ask for money? Margaret nodded, her voice barely audible. I've been in debt, spending more than I should have. I thought if I kept an eye on you, maybe I could figure out how to fix things. A cold fury surged through me. You used the tracking device to watch me so you could ask for money? That's beyond manipulative. You've controlled me my entire life, and now this? Her hands trembled as she reached out. Ava, please, I didn't mean for it to come to this. I'm sorry. Her apology felt hollow. I can't do this anymore, Mom. I can't let you keep controlling my life, even from a distance. Leaving her apartment, I was overwhelmed by a mix of sadness and resolve. I knew that to truly take back my life, I had to sever all ties. This wasn't just about the tracking device or her financial struggles, it was about breaking free from the emotional manipulation that had defined my life. When I got back to my apartment, I made immediate changes. I replaced my phone and added extra security measures to ensure my privacy. I also started looking for a new place to live, far from her reach. Consulting with a lawyer, I began the legal process to separate my family registry from hers, a definitive step toward independence. Every action brought both relief and heartbreak. Freedom was finally within reach, but it came at a heavy cost. I wasn't just distancing myself from Margaret, I was also dismantling the control she had held over me for years. As I packed up my belongings, preparing for my move, my neighbor, Mr. Lawson, offered his support. His kindness was unexpected but welcome. He helped with the logistics and often stopped by to check on me, becoming a calm and steady presence in my chaotic world. One evening, as we sat in my nearly empty apartment, he asked, "How are you holding up, Ava? After everything, I mean." I glanced around, my gaze lingering on the remnants of my old life. It's been a lot. I feel like I can finally breathe, but it's hard to let go of everything that's happened. He nodded, his expression full of understanding. You're doing better than you realize. Moving here, making these changes, it takes real strength. His words struck a chord. It was comforting to speak with someone who had no agenda, no strings attached. When I moved into my new apartment, a modern space with large windows and plenty of light, I felt a sense of liberation. Unpacking my things, I reflected on how far I had come. Each box I opened felt like a small victory, a step further from the shadows of my past. The legal separation from Margaret was bittersweet. While it freed me from her hold, it also marked the end of a bond that, despite its toxicity, had been a part of my life for so long. During this time, Mr. Lawson continued to be a source of support. We spent more time together, sharing conversations that ranged from lighthearted to deeply personal. His calm, steady presence helped me see that not everyone in my life was there to control or manipulate me. On one of those quiet evenings, he looked at me with a soft smile. "You've been through so much, but you're rebuilding. That takes courage." His words lingered with me long after he left. For the first time, I felt like I was more than just someone escaping a toxic past. I was someone creating a new future. This was just the beginning of my journey toward independence and healing. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was finally moving forward, free from the shadows of my mother's control. Mr. Lawson's support was more than I had expected, and it helped me see that there could be a positive side to all this upheaval. As weeks passed, I began to establish a routine in my new apartment. I started working on personal projects I had neglected for years, things that made me happy and allowed me to express myself. I also began to slowly reconnect with friends I had lost touch with, finding comfort in their support and understanding. Despite these positive steps, I couldn't completely escape the shadow of my past. I would occasionally receive messages from Margaret, pleading for forgiveness or asking for updates on my life. Each time, I felt a pang of guilt but knew that responding would only drag me back into the turmoil I had tried so hard to escape. One day, as I was preparing dinner, Mr. Lawson came over to help. We were talking about my new job when he suddenly asked, "Do you ever think about what's next for you, beyond just getting away from everything?" I paused, considering his question. "I'm still figuring that out. I've been so focused on just getting away from Margaret and her control that I haven't really thought about what I want my life to look like now." He smiled gently. "It might be worth thinking about what you want for yourself, not just what you want to escape from. You've made such a big step. What's your vision for your future?" His words struck a chord with me. I realized that while I had been focused on escaping my past, I hadn't spent much time considering what I wanted moving forward. The idea of creating a future based on my own desires was both exhilarating and daunting. That evening, as I sat alone in my new apartment, I began to dream about the future. I thought about the kind of life I wanted to build, not just the absence of Margaret's influence, but a positive direction for myself. It was a new kind of freedom, one that came with its own set of challenges, but also with the promise of growth and self-discovery. I was starting to understand that reclaiming my life meant more than just breaking away from Margaret's control. It was about building something new and meaningful for myself. And while the journey was far from over, I felt a sense of hope and possibility that I hadn't felt in years. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel a cautious optimism. My new apartment was beginning to feel like home, and my routine was finally settling into place. I had been focusing on personal growth and rebuilding connections, but there was still one thing left unsettled: the final confrontation with Margaret. One afternoon, as I was enjoying a quiet moment with a cup of coffee, I received another message from Margaret. It was similar to the others: pleas for reconciliation and hints about her financial troubles. I stared at the message, a mixture of anger and sadness bubbling up inside me. It was clear she was still trying to reach out, but I had made up my mind. I couldn't let her back into my life. Mr. Lawson had become more than just a supportive neighbor. He was now a true friend. Our conversations had become a regular part of my life, and I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't thought possible. One evening, while we were cooking dinner together in my apartment, I decided it was time to share my final thoughts about my mother. "I got another message from Margaret today," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's still reaching out, asking for money and saying she's sorry. I don't know what to do." Mr. Lawson looked up from the stove, concern etched on his face. "You've already done so much to protect yourself. Maybe it's time to consider what's best for your own well-being." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. "I've been thinking about that. I know I need to let go completely, but it's hard to ignore that part of me still feels responsible." He gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's natural to feel that way, but remember, you've done everything you could. Sometimes letting go is the hardest, but most necessary step." The next day, I made a decision. I drafted a final letter to Margaret, laying out my boundaries clearly. I stated that I would no longer respond to her messages, and that any attempts to contact me would be ignored. It was a firm but respectful goodbye, and I hoped it would provide the closure I needed. As I sealed the envelope, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. It was a formal end to a turbulent chapter of my life, but it was also a declaration of my intent to move forward without the weight of the past dragging me down. A few days later, I had another heart-to-heart with Mr. Lawson. We were sitting in the park, enjoying the crisp autumn air. He was quietly observing the changing leaves when he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You've been through so much, Ava. I'm really proud of how far you've come, but I've also noticed something. There's a light in you now that wasn't there before. You seem more at peace." I looked at him, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you. It's been a journey, but I think I'm starting to find my way. I'm learning to focus on what I want, not just what I've escaped from." Mr. Lawson smiled, his eyes reflecting genuine warmth. "It's great to see you like this, and I'm here for you, whatever you need." The conversation lingered with me long after we said our goodbyes. I felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. For the first time in years, I was beginning to envision a future that was truly mine, one built on my own dreams and aspirations. As the year drew to a close, I took time to reflect on the changes I had made. My life was still a work in progress, but I was no longer defined by my past or my mother's control. I was learning to make decisions for myself and to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. One evening, while watching the city lights from my apartment window, I thought about everything I had been through. It was a strange mix of pride and relief to know that I had come out stronger on the other side. There was still uncertainty, but there was also the promise of new beginnings. In the end, it wasn't just about breaking free from my mother's influence. It was about finding my own path and having the courage to walk it. And as I looked forward to whatever the future held, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that, for the first time in a long time, I was truly in control of my own life.